If someone offered you $8 million, would you use it to plant 20,000 acres of grapes in the middle of a desert? Just think about that for a second. Grapes are not cactus. They don't survive on neglect. They need water, fertile soil, and carefully balanced temperatures. Even experienced farmers struggle to grow them under normal conditions. Now, imagine trying to grow them in a place where rain almost never falls, where the ground is just sand and stone, and where strong winds can strip the land bare in minutes. It sounds, honestly, less like a business plan and more like throwing money away. But here's the twist. Someone actually did it. In one of the harshest environments on Earth, China's Gobi Desert, a businessman decided to invest millions into turning barren land into vineyards. And against all odds, he didn't just succeed. He went on to build over 100 wineries, turning a place where almost nothing grows into a thriving industry. So this raises a bigger question. How do you grow vineyards in a place where nothing should survive? To understand how incredible this story is, you need to see the bigger picture. This isn't just about one man trying something unusual. It's about a country facing a problem on a massive scale. In China, desertification has been a serious challenge for decades. This is when fertile land slowly turns into desert, losing its ability to support life. And the scale is, honestly, hard to imagine. Over 2.6 million square kilometers of land in China are affected. That's about 27% of the entire country. More than a quarter of its land becoming dry, unstable, and unproductive. But deserts are not just empty spaces. They can be dangerous. Strong winds sweep across these barren lands, picking up loose sand and turning it into massive sandstorms. These storms can travel hundreds of kilometers, covering cities in dust, reducing visibility to almost zero, and damaging homes, crops, and infrastructure. For farmers, this can be devastating. Entire harvests can be wiped out in a single storm. For families living nearby, it can mean health risks, economic losses, and constant uncertainty. Livestock struggle to survive. Crops fail. Communities are pushed closer to poverty. In this way, deserts don't just sit quietly. They expand, slowly taking over land that people depend on. So China wasn't just dealing with an environmental issue. It was facing a growing threat to food, livelihoods, and stability. And instead of simply accepting it, the country made a bold decision, not just to survive the desert, but to push it back. Fighting a desert is not something you solve in a year or even a decade. It takes long-term thinking, massive effort, and patience. Over the past few decades, China has launched one of the largest environmental projects in the world, a mission to turn sand back into living land. The numbers alone are staggering. The country has planted over 18 billion trees in desert and semi-desert regions. To put that into perspective, that's more trees than the total population of the world, planted one by one across dry, unforgiving landscapes. These trees are not just for decoration. They act like natural shields. Their roots hold the soil in place, preventing it from being blown away. Their leaves slow down the wind, reducing the power of sandstorms. Over time, they help the land retain moisture, making it possible for other plants to grow. Because of efforts like this, China has managed to restore hundreds of millions of acres of land, turning once barren areas into something usable again. But trees alone are not enough. To truly transform these regions, China began exploring new approaches, government-backed environmental programs, local communities joining planting efforts, scientists developing crops that can survive in harsh conditions, and businesses experimenting with new forms of desert agriculture. This wasn't just about planting trees. It was about rethinking what a desert could be. Could it produce food? Could it support industries? Could it become economically valuable instead of just a problem? While these efforts were happening on a national level, one man saw an opportunity to take this idea even further and take a risk that most people wouldn't dare to take. The man at the center of this story is Liu Jingqi, and what makes his decision even more surprising is where he came from. Liu wasn't a farmer, he wasn't an environmental scientist. He made his fortune in one of the most traditional industries in China, coal. In the 1990s, while many people were moving away from risky investments, Liu did the opposite. He bought into the coal business and expanded aggressively, growing from one mine to several, and even developing multiple ports to support the trade. Within just a decade, he had built a business worth billions of yuan. By most standards, he had already succeeded. But success didn't mean stability. As time passed, Liu began to realize something important. Coal is limited. No matter how profitable it was, it would eventually run out. And when it did, so would the business built around it. So he started looking for something new, something that could last longer. That's when he came across an investment video about Ningxia, a region in China that was trying to develop a wine industry. The idea was to create a grape corridor, a large-scale wine-producing region. It sounded promising. But when Liu traveled there to see it for himself, the reality was completely different. What he found was not a green agricultural zone. It was a harsh, empty stretch of the Gobi Desert. Strong winds blew sand into the air, stinging the skin. There were no trees, no visible water sources, and almost no infrastructure. To most people, it looked like a place to avoid, not invest in. Even his friends who came with him were skeptical. They saw high costs, slow returns, and huge risks. In their eyes, this project didn't make sense. But Liu saw something else. Where others saw a dead end, he saw potential. And in 2012, despite all the doubts, he made a decision that would define everything that followed. He invested millions of dollars to buy thousands of acres of desert land. And he chose to start building vineyards in a place where nothing should grow. Making the decision was one thing. Surviving the reality of the desert was something else entirely. The Gobi Desert is not just dry, it's hostile. During the day, temperatures can rise to extreme levels, baking the ground. At night, they can drop sharply, creating conditions that are difficult for most plants to handle. And then there are the winds, powerful, relentless, and capable of lifting huge amounts of sand into the air. These sandstorms don't just reduce visibility. They can bury young plants, strip away soil, and destroy months of work in a matter of hours. Now think about grapes. They are delicate compared to desert plants. They need controlled watering, stable soil, and careful temperature balance to grow properly. Too much water and the roots can rot. Too little, and the plant dries out. Even worse, the quality of grapes depends heavily on timing. During early growth, vines need more water to develop strong leaves. But later, as the fruit forms, the water has to be reduced so sugars can concentrate, giving the grapes their flavor. In a desert, controlling all of this is extremely difficult. And then came the biggest problem of all. Water didn't exist. There were no nearby lakes or rivers feeding the land. The groundwater was buried so deep underground that extracting it was both difficult and expensive. Without a reliable water source, the entire project would fail before it even began. It didn't matter how much money Liu invested or how strong his vision was. Without water, nothing would grow. Faced with a desert that had no water, Liu Jingqi had two choices: give up or change the environment itself. He chose the second. Not far from his land flowed one of China's most important rivers, the Yellow River. It was the closest reliable water source, but there was a problem. The water didn't naturally reach the desert, so Liu decided to do something bold. He would bring the river to the desert. This meant building an irrigation system from scratch, digging channels across dry land to redirect water into the vineyards. It wasn't a small project. He hired over 1,000 workers, many of them local laborers, to take part in the construction. Day after day, they dug through tough ground, laying the foundation for a system that would carry life into a place that had none. It took time. It took money, and it took persistence. But eventually, the channels were completed, and for the first time, water began to flow into the desert land. This changed everything. Now, the land could be controlled. But irrigation wasn't just about adding water. It had to be precise. Grapes require careful timing. During early growth, vines need more water to build strong branches and leaves. During the fruiting stage, water must be reduced so sugars can concentrate, improving flavor. Too much water at the wrong time could ruin the entire crop. So instead of flooding the land, Lu's team created a system that allowed them to adjust water levels at different stages, almost like turning a dial to control plant growth. Slowly, the desert began to change. What was once dry, cracked ground started to show lines of green. Small vines took root. Leaves began to spread. The transformation had started, but even with water, the desert was not done fighting, because it still had another powerful weapon: the wind. Water solved one problem, but the desert still had another way to destroy everything: wind and sand. In the Gobi Desert, strong winds can turn loose sand into a moving wall. When these sandstorms hit, they don't just pass by, they tear through anything in their path. For young grape plants, this is devastating. Sand can bury roots, strip leaves, and damage vines before they even have a chance to grow. One storm can undo months of work, so Lu Jingqi needed a way to defend the land itself. The solution came from a simple idea, but on a massive scale. He planted over 2 million poplar trees around the vineyards. These trees acted like a natural wall. When strong winds approached, the trees would slow them down, reducing their power before they reached the crops. Instead of hitting the vineyards directly, the sand would be blocked or dropped before it could cause damage. It's similar to how walls protect a city. But here, the walls were alive. But protection alone wasn't enough. The plants themselves needed to adapt. Lu worked with researchers to develop grape varieties that could survive harsh conditions, vines that could handle dry air, temperature swings, and poor soil better than traditional grapes. This was not an overnight success. There were failures. Some crops didn't survive. Some methods didn't work. Each season brought new challenges. But instead of stopping, they adjusted, tested, and improved. Year after year, the system became stronger. Then, around 2016, something changed. The vineyards produced a large, successful harvest. For the first time, it was clear. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It worked. The desert, once seen as impossible to farm, was now producing grapes. Real, usable, high-quality grapes. And with that success came the next step, turning those grapes into something even more valuable. Once Lu Jingqi proved that grapes could grow in the desert, he didn't stop there. Growing fruit was only half the vision. The real goal was to turn those grapes into something far more valuable: wine. Winemaking is a precise craft. Small changes in temperature, timing, or technique can completely change the final product. So Liu knew that if he wanted to succeed, he needed more than just good grapes. He needed expertise. He invested in building modern wine cellars and brought in experienced winemakers, including international experts, to guide the process. Together, they refined every step, from harvesting to fermentation to aging. By 2018, the first batches of wine were ready, and the results surprised many people. The wine wasn't just acceptable, it was high quality, rich in flavor, and able to compete with established brands. But the real turning point came in 2020. Lu took his wine to an international competition in France, a country known for producing some of the best wines in the world. Competing there meant facing top-tier wineries with decades, even centuries of experience. Few expected a newcomer from the desert to stand out, but it did. His wine won an award, gaining global recognition and proving that something created in one of the harshest environments on Earth could compete on the world stage. And from that moment, everything accelerated. What started as 7,500 acres of barren land expanded into over 20,000 acres of vineyards. More than 100 wineries were built, turning the region into a growing industry hub. But the impact wasn't just business. It changed lives. Thousands of local residents found jobs and stable income. Communities that once struggled began to see new opportunities. In some areas, average incomes rose dramatically, improving living conditions and giving families access to education and better futures. And as success spread, more investors joined in. By 2024, the region had grown into a major wine-producing area, with hundreds of thousands of acres under cultivation and hundreds of wineries operating in what was once empty desert. What used to be a barren, lifeless landscape had become a thriving ecosystem, both economically and environmentally. And that's the real lesson of this story. Limits are often not as fixed as they seem. With the right mix of vision, persistence, and innovation, even the most unlikely places can be transformed. A desert can grow vineyards, a risk can become an industry, and an idea that sounds impossible can reshape an entire region. So next time you hear something that sounds unrealistic, ask yourself, is it truly impossible or just never tried before? If you enjoyed this story of transformation and innovation, make sure to subscribe and follow for more stories like this, where bold ideas turn into real-world change.